right, good morning. We are in Genesis part 4, lesson 4a, because we're just doing homework that was day 1 and 2. Again, so thankful. It was 3 chapters. It was a lot of information to try to dig through. And how many of you in here had opportunities to either listen to sermons or pastors, or even reading on some commentaries on these chapters? Did you actually get time to do that? What were your thoughts on some of their interpretations?
About all 3 chapters?
Just in general, yes. I mean, I don't want a specific note. I'm just saying, in general, what are you seeing when you now study like you do and then go to other people to hear their thoughts?
I'm not sure I really learned anything different from the commentaries that I read.
Okay.
Except maybe some of the meanings of the words.
Okay. I got to say, on one of the notes in the book that you gave me, because I've been reading it now and I'm loving it, but he got one part definitely wrong, and that was the length, the ages or something, or how long they had been married.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it was like, wait a minute, she'd already had 4 other kids before this. He said something about, yeah, he was saying that, and he was saying that there had only been like so many years since the beginning. I'm like, that can't be. She already had 4 kids plus these 3 now. That's 7. It had to be at least 7 years, right? Just to have 7 kids.
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Oh, yeah, anyway, I thought that was interesting. Yeah. For me, what I have been seeing consistently through the years is after I do my own inductive study, you catch things that are off, and often it's not substantial things. It's not anything that's going to ruin the doctrinal truth of what you're looking at. And I think that is probably the bigger takeaway for me this week on just my word of wisdom, so to speak. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You get a great commentary, and his is a great commentary. When you read something and you see they've made an error in a specific area, you say, is it doctrinally a devastation to somebody's faith with God? The answer is no. Then you go, okay, just keep reading. What I actually do, I write in my book, so I write a little note on the side, and I sometimes just put a little X right through that piece, and that way next time I read it, I go, just skip over that. Yeah. So I don't read it again and get it in my head and make myself crazy. Right? But I also found that sometimes, what about the places in the storyline that we're looking at where it's unsaid? There's pieces of the story that are just not revealed to us. Did you notice that? Like Jacob, Esau, they reunite, right? And Jacob has said, oh, I'll follow you. I'll follow you down to Edom, down to Seir. But he doesn't. Yeah. And then they don't go back and say, well, did he or didn't he? But they just move right on to the next part of Jacob, which is our storyline that we're following. We're following the bloodline of the bearer of the promises of God, right? Since he's that bloodline bearer, we're following him. And so Esau just gets dropped. And what happened between Jacob and Esau is not told us. So it leaves room for theory, so to speak. And so often I find pastors go into great detail about all their theories, which is interesting. Sometimes it is fun to talk on those things, and it's a good exercise, I guess. But in the end, it's what's told to us that's what we're looking for. That's the part, as inductive students, that's what we are looking for, is what did God tell us? What did he not tell us? Sometimes can tell us a lot, actually. If he didn't tell us that, why, right? And then go back to the what did he tell us, and what is the author's purpose in the writing that we are looking at. And when you're looking at narratives, this is even true in the Gospels, for instance, when you're looking through the Gospels and you see the storylines of Jesus. Each of those Gospels are written with an author's purpose for writing. Can somebody close that door? Thank you so much. When the author is writing with a designed purpose and certain pieces are left out, right, it's because they aren't accomplishing his purpose. Are you seeing what I'm saying? That's what I think we also see even in these Old Testament narratives where we get a little bit of a storyline. We're all wrapped up in the story because we've just gotten deep in the plot, right? It's like watching a movie in your head, right? Aren't you seeing this in your head? And all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute. He's supposed to go see Esau. What happened, right? And you're just dying to see that next sequel to the storyline, and you don't get it. So I think as an inductive student, the point that you need to remember is that if it's not given to you, it's because it does not accomplish the author's purpose. And it's kind of pointless to go into a whole lot of speculation. And I tend to be the one that gives the benefit of the doubt unless the guy's character is already established as being quite evil and nefarious, right? So if you know their character, you could say, well, he probably had a bad intent there. Oh, he actually has, like with Jacob, there's some things about Jacob in our story today where you're like, well, why didn't he, right? And you're like, what's that about? Well, it doesn't go into that, but what it does tell us is something that we need to compare. Why didn't he and why did they? And make an assumption for the good, not for the bad, in the storyline if it's possible. Otherwise, just drop it and move on, okay? I don't know if that's a whole lot of 101 this morning on how to do inductive study, but it is a little piece, I think, of the storyline that happens for all of us because we get caught up. I get caught up sometimes in these things, and I just want you to know that if it doesn't accomplish God's purpose, the author's purpose for writing that book, there's a reason it's not stated, okay? All right, so with that put behind us, now let's go ahead and take a look at our Genesis 32. So where did we come from? Let's start there first. I'm sorry, say that.
Jacob and Laban parting ways.
Yes.
The little covenant thing, and that's what we
Yeah. So Jacob had stolen Esau's blessing. He left, was gone about 20 years. I think last week I kept saying 27. I don't know why I was saying that. It says 20, I think, almost everywhere, right? I didn't find it a place after, when I went back, I went, oh, it's not 20.
7 and 6.
Yeah. When you add that up, yeah, you get 20, right? 14 and 6 is 20. Anyway, I think I wrote it down wrong once, and then I kept carrying it forward. See? Bad girl. All right, so don't do that. So I think it's been 20 years, right? In any event, he's gone 20 years. So now God has told Jacob he's to return, right? Now Jacob is about to return. What is, from the text, what is the emotional state of Jacob as he is about to return back home? Mm-hmm. It tells us in verse 7 of chapter 32 that he is greatly afraid and distressed.
Yes.
So that with that kind of as a first piece of our information, now we can enter into the rest of the storyline and start looking at how this story, how this narrative continues, how this journey continues. We're looking at who is God and who is man. Okay, we've been learning an awful lot about who our God is, but we are also learning an awful lot about who we are, aren't we? And as we're looking at the frailties and the sin and the shortcomings of these men, don't forget to also look for the strengths as well, because I think sometimes I tend to be a little harsh on myself. You know, I think Karen just said that she's trying to forgive herself for little thing, a very little thing that really wasn't even her fault, but yet she's, upset with herself. We need to learn that God doesn't look at us that way. The Lord looks at us as so valuable that He is doing this for us. This plan of a seed promise that is through the generations being worked out in this narrative that we're looking. He loves us so much that He is putting up with these very frail, weak humans. We have been through the garden and the eviction. We've been through the flood. We've been through Sodom and Gomorrah. We are now in these storylines of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're looking at men who don't always do it right, who have, they throw their wives under the buses. They have favorite kids, and that causes trouble. They don't remember to pray or go back to God. All these problems, boy, can we relate to these. So this is what we're looking at, and that's where we're at today, yet again today. We're still continuing on this journey. So let's begin by outlining. The first 5 verses, I think, are that first paragraph, according to the way that they have it marked, and so I just stuck with that. Tell me what you see going on in the opening of our narrative. The previous chapter, he's left, right? The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of his father, judged between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his kinsmen to the meal. They all ate the meal. They spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Now, okay, so now connects back to what just happened, the parting between these wives of Jacob and Jacob himself. They've all left. Where have they left from? From the area of Haran, Padam Aram, right, which is Iraq, right, presently, current day Iraq, or was it Iran? It's Iraq. Thank you. I thought it was. Okay. Okay. So he's left Iraq. Now he's on his way. What is his first encounter? Angels. Isn't that the coolest thing? Now, did that trigger any thoughts in your head? How did he leave? How had he left? When he left the land, what had happened just before he left? Go back to 28. Flip back. Yes. Uh-huh. So he was, as he left the land, the very last thing that we are told happens to him on that land before the very next chapter 29 of Genesis is him getting married to Leah and Rachel, right? So he's gone. But the very last thing we see 20 years earlier is he had laid on that place to sleep. God gave him a dream, and he sees the angels of God ascending and descending on a ladder, correct? What did we determine that ladder is representative of? Jesus, right? And we got that because there's a New Testament passage. Was it John chapter 1, verse 31? But it's actually, I think, 29 to 31. You kind of have to read the whole thing in there. But where he literally makes almost a direct quote of this picture, this dream of the angels ascending and descending, but he calls himself the ladder in that New Testament reference. So that is just so awesome. So after he has that dream, what does he say about this place? The Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. That's in chapter 28, verse 16, right? The Lord is in this place. I did not know it. He saw the angels. He sees the spiritual warfare that's going on there on that land, the servants of God, the messengers of God, right? The ministering spirits of God, both interacting with him, and he doesn't know it. God himself, and he doesn't know it. How many times have we seen God physically appearing in these storylines? Often or very rarely? It seems like a lot, but yeah. But with each of the patriarchs, does God appear to them? At least once, if not twice. I think if you ever have a real serious dream from the Lord, and the God speaks to you, you know it's the Lord, and you wake up trembling, and you know it. Those are rare. Those really do not happen. These people who get up on stages and preach every week, God said to me last night in a dream. I'm like, okay, what kind of psychedelics are you taking? I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I question that. When you're having a dream from God once a week so that you can present a sermon the next week, it makes me suspicious. these men are having these dreams once, twice, maybe 3 times in a lifetime, right? Abraham had the Lord appear to him, right? How was he called when he appeared to him there just before he went down to Sodom and Gomorrah? What was he called?
Abram.
No, not Abram. I mean, what was the angel called? He's not just an angel, he is the angel of the Lord. So, and these are called Christophanies or theophanies. This is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. You can tell that by the context, if it's actually God or not, by the things that are said. Does he receive your worship when he appears? Does he pronounce blessings on you? I will do this for you. I will do that for you. You have to read the context. And this one, and when he sees him, he does come in an appearance and a form that man is able to comprehend and physically see. And there's a design purpose in that, right? In this dream that we saw back in 28, that's what happened. He had a dream reaching to heaven, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And then in 13 it says, and behold, the Lord stood above it. So he sees the Lord. That has to be a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham. I mean, he lays it out clear, right? I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bring you back, so forth. Okay, so that's the scenario of when he left 20 years ago. Now, 20 years later, what's the first thing he sees?
Angels of God.
Does that make a whole lot stronger impact to you at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, when you connect remember when he was about to leave, he said to God, he made a vow to him. He said, if you will be with me and if you will do these things and if you will bring me back safely, then you will be my God, right? So he has left with this vision of these angels and of this word of the Lord, the appearance of the Lord to him. And now he comes back, and the very first thing God does as he's about to approach, he's not in the land yet, but he's about to enter, is standing before him. And the camp that he's about to camp in is what? The angels of God. Now, these are just angels, right? This does not say the angel of the Lord. It doesn't even tell us that they say anything to him. They just make an appearance. Why might that be? What's the point then? If they're not going to talk to him, they're not going to give him a message, why are they there?
Well, he's afraid, and he's obeying God.
Okay.
And so
Excellent.
it
That's
just
good.
seems like they're there to encourage him.
Okay.
God
Yes.
watching you. If you see an
Yeah.
angel, it's because
Yeah.
the Lord sent them. And
Yes.
you're like, oh, okay, so I'm going the right way. You're not telling me don't go.
Yes. So it seems to be almost a comfort.
Yes.
That's kind of how I looked at that this seemed to be the Lord affirming him that you are where you're supposed to be. I promised I would bring you back safely. My angels are by the way, what might this also say to him and to us about our walking with the Lord in general?
If you obey him, if you do what he tells you to do, he's going to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there are ministering spirits
Yes.
in your life that you may not even be aware of.
Yes.
They're there. We know they're there because God's word has told us over and over there is a spiritual warfare going on. This record in 28 showed Abraham, oh, God is in this place. I did not even know it. I mean, right, he was clueless, which is hysterical. His father had faith in God. The father before that had faith in God. All the lineage previous years before that. But here now, as he's about to leave the land, he's going, God is in this place. I didn't even know it. So that tells you kind of where he was with God, for one thing. Now, 20 years later, he's coming back in. The first thing he sees is these angels appear to him. Now, that's not the most important part of this, but it certainly does. I think it's kind of like it starts with a bang. His return starts with a bang. Abraham, I went with you, and I went before you, and I went behind you, and I am still with you. I've been with you all along. Okay, so he is, in this part, he talks about this place called God's camp, right? He calls it Manaheim. What does that word mean? Double camp. Okay, so Jacob, let's get a title here, 1 to 5. It's basically just Jacob is preparing to re-enter, right? I guess you could say re-enter or return. I was kind of wanting to make sure that you saw that geographical location, that it's Canaan that he's about to enter back into. And that's what God called him to do. We see angels greet him. They appeared to him in that moment. I mean, that's a supernatural thing, right? That God would allow these angels to appear to him, and he had seen them when he left before. So let's get that up here, 28:12, as our remembrance. Before and after, there are angels with him. Now God, he says, this is called God's camp. This is God's camp. That's what Jacob says of it. And then he gives it this name. So we're going to go ahead and look at it. Manna, M-A-H, right? H-A-N-A, Mahaim. There you go. Oh, I like that. That was very nicely done. Who did that? Who just said that? That was good. Was that you, Karen? Oh, that was awesome, Karen. Say that again. Mahaim. You got a better word.
No, we have these two Hebrew scholars in my Sunday school class at House Notes. They're incredible.
Oh, good.
We have so much fun. And, yeah, they're teaching us some interesting.
Who is that?
Wes.
Yeah, I know Wes. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and then Tom.
Oh, Tom. Yeah, I love Tom. Yeah, he's given me some great books. Okay, yeah, awesome. Okay, so Mannheim, and did you all do a word study? Oh, good. Me too. What does it mean? Two camps, or double camp. And why do you? What happened?
God's camp and Jacob's camp.
It's God's camp, and yes. So the angels are there, and his. Oh, again, what did I just throw off? Yeah, this lip is not tall enough for me. I actually need another right now because I have two of these. I know, now I need two. I know. It's really sad. I'm going to leave that there for the moment. It fell out of my book. It's all logistical. I'm trying to figure out how to. Oh, I know what I can do. I'm going to steal this and use it. See, I need to be able to see my written text and my book. This has got my homework in it, this book, and that's where all my word studies are, all my research, right? But then this is my observation worksheets with the text of God's Word. All right, so, sorry, all organized. Okay, okay, so we have this, it just simply means two camps. And I did think it was very interesting because what it does is him calling it that, again, just as a recognition of the fact that the angels are there and his camp is there. That's why it's called two camps, the camp of both God's angels and himself. So I think that was pretty cool. So it starts out with a really nice bang as he re-enters the land. Then 6 to 8, the next part of that, he gives us a scenario, God does, telling us basically the emotional state of Jacob. That's really all it's about. But what is it that reinforces that emotional state in that moment? Is the messengers that he had sent on ahead, what news did they come back with?
Say your brother's coming out to meet you, but he's coming with 400 men.
Oh my goodness. This is just a shockaroo. Would that kind of worry you a little bit when you're not sure of the mental place of your brother at this point? You know you left on bad terms and that he was angry enough to kill you back then. That was his last known word out of the lips of his brother is, I'm going to kill him as soon as I'm done mourning my dad. So now he's coming to greet him, to meet him. He's been told, well, the one thing that's interesting is he did send messengers on ahead. So he went to kind of give a forewarning to the brother. Why might that be or not be, in your opinion, a good strategy if you are about to approach someone in this kind of a scenario?
It also gives you time to prepare, like, what's their state? Oh, they're super angry. And
Yeah.
they got the
Well,
police.
you're already in that state because Jacob's been coming, so he's already been working through that. Why might he send messengers on ahead to his brother to say, hey, Jacob is coming? Basically for the same reason, to give Esau time.
Work through your process.
Right.
I'm coming. So
Yeah.
you're gonna kill me, figure it
I
out.
almost wonder, I do wonder if there was actually a little strategy in that part of the move as well. Because he gave him some time. Now, it could work both ways. It could be that the 400 have been gathered to kill him.
That's a little overkill though, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it really is. And also, what does that tell you about Esau at this point?
He's done pretty well.
He has done awesomely well. Now, what we do know is, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me like the Lord's changed Esau's heart.
It does seem like it. Once we get further into the story, we definitely see that. Where Jacob is not aware of that, though. So what we're looking here is at Jacob going, I don't know what he's going to do. But he sends a messenger ahead, maybe in his mind thinking it'll give him a little time to process that he's going to encounter me and see me again and give him time to kind of work through some of those emotions.
Then he also says, I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants I have sent to tell my master, my Lord, that I may find favor in your sight. So
Yes.
he's trying to.
He is trying to soften the blow, isn't he? Yes, he's buttering him up. Exactly. In a way. And he's also, and although I would call it buttering, because, that's just my personality. I would laugh about it. But it's also kind of letting the brother know that he is where in all of this. What is it? What is the fact that he sent gifts ahead? The fact that he refers to him as my Lord. And the fact that he's literally coming to see him face to face. He's ready to encounter.
He's letting Esau know he's humbling before him.
Thank you.
Be ready for reconciliation.
He's ready for reconciliation. He's ready to confess that he was wrong in his part on what happened. He wants to reunite. He misses his brother. He wants and he longs for this. So in a way, it's got a lot of little nuances in this 3 or 4 little verses, doesn't it?
Well, Isaac's still there with Esau, isn't he? So he's going back to see his father.
Yeah. I don't think my pen is working. You know what? I think that those wipes are putting like an oily film on here and it doesn't work.
Well, I wiped it down, like it was a paper towel, so there's no.
Yeah. Well, there's this oily film on here. I'm just saying so that you know. I don't think those wipes do good because they leave well, can you read that very well? That lighter blue down. See how it's
Try your blue marker over on this board over here, 'cause it didn't have to.
on this.
Yeah, I didn't have to wipe that board, so it said
Oh, wrong pen. That one works real well.
apples and apples.
Apples and apples.
It's the same.
It picked up the ink off. It picked up
Oh,
the
maybe.
stuff on here is what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm just telling you because I think it's, so I don't know if this one is going to work or not. Let's try this new marker and see. Yeah, I can see that it's bubbling.
I'm confused here, because we don't find out that Esau's got 400 men with him until chapter 33.
No, he says it right here in verse 6.
400 men are with you.
He's coming, and 400 men are with him. Yeah, I know. You know what? I actually went in and used a red marker and put it down because those are the little things that you miss. It's so easy to read right over them. But yeah, so he's got these men with him. Jacob says he's greatly afraid and he's distressed. So let's look at those 2 words about, well, let's just look at one of them, the word distressed. We know what afraid means, right? Terrified. But let's look at that word distressed. Did anybody look that one up?
Yes.
Oh, good. Number 33, 34.
No. 6887 is what I.
Okay. Tell me what you got.
Oh, okay, 6887 is another one, yeah.
Okay.
It's the same.
bind, tie up, be restricted, narrow, cramped.
Strange. Okay.
That's what I have also.
33, 34 says, be in a state of intense trouble and vexed. That one sounds like the definition, yes? So I'm going to put mine up here, and I'll have to work it out and figure out what happened there.
It's the same, but I have
somet-
Logos right here.
Yeah,
And-
sometimes what you get is a root word which can have variations of it, and then in the text that you're in, if you can find a Bible commentary that uses that reference, Genesis, what are we, 34:7, right? If you can, or 32:7. If it actually gives you that, then you'll get a more accurate interpretation. Again, now, okay, this is good. A good opportunity to talk about this, though.
Because this definition though told me, I mean, I could feel that in my body.
Say that again.
To bind, tie up, be restricted,
Okay.
cramped.
That, yes, and at the root of it, that would make perfect sense, doesn't it? And what I was going to say is, though, when you're looking at word studies, remember I've said this before, context rules for interpretation, so we've got the same interpretation. We're coming to the same conclusion. But sometimes the translation into the English, because we're going from one language to another, those of you who do foreign languages, you know, sometimes there just isn't quite a perfect fit. And so what they do is they throw out this word, and they throw out this word, and they throw out this word. And depending on what the sentence is that you're saying will determine which one actually fits best. And each culture is different in how they view certain words. My good friend from England is probably really aware of that. There are things that my friend Shirley Baker, who Beth, I've talked to her about her a few times, but you know, I would say certain things to Shirley, and Shirley would go, "Katie, don't say that." And I'm like, "Why not?" She's go, "Do you know what that means?" She would tell me, and I'm like, "That's not what I meant, right?" So that I'm just trying to explain to you that when we're translating from one language to another language, you kind of have to balance two things: your context for interpretation, and then go into the dictionaries and use as many dictionaries as you can. If the first one doesn't sound quite right and you're not sure, see, I would have read that and not been quite sure.
Well,
I get it now, but
I did look it up in Strong's right here on my computer.
Uh-huh.
And it is the definition that you have. The 3334 does say to bind, to be distressed, be in distress, be cramped, be narrow, be scant, be in straits, make narrow, cause distress, be siege.
okay.
And that is 3334 Yasser, Y-A-S-A-R. Is that what you have as your
Yep, that's what I have.
Y-A-S-A-R?
Okay, and what I did was I went into my Dictionary of Biblical Languages, which is 7674 in their dictionary. The numbers are going to be different in different dictionaries. That's where I got be in distress, be in a state of intense trouble, and it actually gives me Genesis 32:8 as my reference. So they give you a different a deeper understanding, and they pull that definition from the context. Are you understanding? They read the context of what was said, and then they said, this is what it's saying in English, right? But then they use different wording. So is that kind of making sense? Go ahead.
Just an interesting note, it's the first use of the word in the Bible.
Oh, is it? First use? Oh, I missed one. Oh, I got to write that down. First use. That's cool. Distress. First use.
Because when I'm looking at it in the Strong's, it's the very first one listed.
It's certainly not the first time someone felt distressed, however. There's been a lot of them, but first use of a word in language. That's awesome. Well, and this would be its most clearly defined understanding. So the idea of being distressed would be this. The first word, of course, to describe was afraid. We know what it means to be afraid. It literally means to be terrified or in fear. And so that's why they translated it afraid. Okay, so this just gives you the mental place where he's at. To be in a state of intense trouble. always thought this was funny. Anna Green Gables uses this word a lot, vexed. And in English, we never use that word anymore, right? I'm vexed. Vexed to me sounds like I'm mad at you, right? I'm vexed with you. But that's not what it means. It means I am troubled. I am in distress. Okay. Now, and you said it means pressed. Say that.
To bind, restricted, tied up, cramped. And when I read those words, I could just think about how.
Yes. This is speaking of the emotion of it.
So these are the brown,
Kind of like
driver
being
bricks. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, those are the brown driver bricks.
Bricks definitions.
Right.
And yours are the Strong's definitions.
Right. I always go to Strong's. That's why. Yeah, okay.
That makes sense.
But
And he felt trapped.
yes, he did feel trapped. And all I want you guys to know about word studies is, and I had this conversation with Kaylee also, how do you know which one to pick and when you pick it and so forth. I always say the more word studies you can go into different, like there's the theological word book, there's this dictionary of biblical languages with semantic domains, whatever that means. There's like 4, 5, 6 different kinds of word study books you can use and go into. If you only have one, use it. It's fine. You don't have to be I have a variety, and mine are linked on my Bible program, so I don't even have to open it. I just have to click on the next number and keep going. So I've got it made in the shade. That's because I have the Logos Teacher's Edition, and they give me more dictionaries because I'm supposed to be smarter than you. And I'm not. And I just have a lot of dictionaries, yeah. But and with Logos, they give you a basic program, and then they give you the next step up, and then there's the teachers, and then there's the Scholars Edition. And one of the questions that Kaylee asked me this week was about, well, it was along those lines, and how do you know, which one is right or whatever. I'm going, well, if you want to know that part, you're talking about understanding the grammatical structure of Greek or Hebrew. You're talking about actually doing study in the language in order to break the parts down into their smaller pieces. And that's really for people who are seminary students who need to have those kinds of language skills. We don't do that in Precept. Precept is actually, I hate to say it this way, but it is dumbed down for people like me, so that it's just its most simplest form. You're learning how to do a word study and draw it out at its most basic points that suits your needs, which is, what does it really mean, or am I going to miss an understanding here if I don't look this word up? And the answer almost 100% of the time is yes, you're going to miss something if you don't look it up, because you're either going to affirm that you understood it clearly, or you're going to say, oh, that's not what I thought it meant at all. And you need to know that. So that's the reason.
English too, when we have an English word.
Oh,
and it has
for
3
sure.
different definitions, you're like, which one of these is the context telling you that it is?
Right.
So we have
So again, you have to use your reasoning a little bit. It isn't as clear cut as just looking a word up and writing it down. It's not fill in the blank in this. You have to use your brain a little bit. Okay, now, so 6 to 8. Now let's do 9 to 12. The next piece of this storyline, I can't use that blue. It does not want to write. Okay, this part I want to spend a little more time on, and then we'll have to hurry through everything else. But I found this part to be fascinating. What is going on in 9 to 12? He's praying. This is Jacob's prayer. Tell me about Jacob in prayer life.
clear there hadn't been a lot.
There has not been a whole lot of prayer life with Jacob. Have y'all noticed that? It's a little bit like Sarah and Abraham when they decided to take on Hagar. Did they go to the Lord and say, Lord, is this your will? Is this how it's going to happen? Should we do this? No. The same thing with Jacob. Then he ended up taking on 2 more wives that are handmaidens in order to supplement children bearing for these wives who were in competition for how many kids they would be having. And in doing that, they don't pray. So here we're going to see this again, that there's not been a whole lot of prayer going on. So now there's prayer. But I find this interesting. Let's read this and talk it through a little bit. The opening part of it in 9, Jacob said, tell me, how does he address God in this? My father's God. Oh, this is my father Abraham's God, and this is my father Isaac's God. But does he make any kind of a personal pronoun attachment to God at this point? So what does that show us a little bit here?
It's not personal yet.
He's not yet in real personal relationship with God. Has he been hearing from God? Yes. Has God been guiding him, protecting, and promising him things? Yes. How do we relate that to our lives and our relationships with God? Has God always been reaching out for every man? That he desires that all men be saved, that none should perish, right? So if God is always reaching out, we kind of see that here. He's reaching out for Jacob. Now with Jacob, there's a very specific providential plan that he's using him for, that he doesn't totally probably grasp yet. But he does understand there's a blessing that's been being passed on, and that he's the one. I mean, he wanted it, right? He cheated his brother out of it because he wanted it, but his brother sold it to him. So, I mean, there's all these things that have been going on here. But yet, he doesn't seem to quite have a personal relationship with God yet, right? But what do you see in the very next sentence there?
He's reminding God what he said.
Yeah. He said, well, he says, I'm going to put this on here. My father's God. That's kind of how I'm interpreting. That's in verse 9, right? Then he says in the next one, what does he say about himself? In verse, I'm unworthy. What is that telling us about Jacob at this point? He's humbling. He's making a confession. He's humbling himself, right? So we see him making this confession. So he confesses he is unworthy. I don't know if you guys slowed down to do this. Did anybody do what I'm doing right here? Because this was such a cool, this caught my mind. Who in here is an evangelist? Any oh, I don't have an evangelist. Well, that's why you guys didn't. I can guarantee you, if you guys had that spiritual gifting of evangelism, this one, you would have nailed it in a nanosecond. Okay, because this one is such a cool reference here. Okay, so he makes, first he's saying, and he's acknowledging not personal God. I'm going to add the word yet. Okay? He confesses, however, to God at this point that he is unworthy. What is the next thing he does in 10?
He acknowledges that he came with only a staff, but now he's two people.
Yeah. So when he acknowledges that, what is he acknowledging it about who?
God's provision.
Yeah, he's acknowledging that basically he's acknowledging God. He's saying, look, God, all this stuff that's going on, it's not about me, it's about you. You have done this. And I am acknowledging this is your work. This is you doing this. This is all about there are two words used in there, right? Loving kindness and faithfulness. Isn't that amazing? So he's acknowledging God. Acknowledging God, loving kindness. Now, what do we know about that word, loving kindness? It's a covenant word. And then the idea of faithfulness is this trustworthiness, this ability to really rely on and know that God will do exactly what he says. If God speaks it, he will do it, right? That's how necessary is that to relationship with God? That you understand who God is about his loving kindness and his faithfulness. Would you say it's a foundational piece of understanding God. You have to have that if you want to enter into a relationship with God. I think Hebrews, it says they must acknowledge that God is, and that he is a rewarder of those that seek him. That's how it says in Hebrews, right? Do you guys remember that? Somebody find that verse. I think it's in Hebrews 6. And it's probably verse 6-ish, maybe, somewhere in there. It's been a while since I looked it up. But
So that's the foundation for faith.
for faith.
That's
So
it.
what are you guys starting to clue into here?
Salvation.
He's confessing his sin.
Yes.
He's unworthy. He's acknowledging who God is at this point. All right. What is the next thing we see in verse 10? What does he refer to himself as?
Servant.
So what has he just done?
Me, the Lord, the Lord.
Yeah, he just submitted to God. He just bowed his knee to God. He said, I am your servant. Now, he was bowing to his brother out of humbleness and hoping his brother wouldn't kill him. But here he's bowing before God and literally submitting himself into the service of God. I am your servant. He submits to God. Okay, that's in 10. That one up here was also 10. Okay, so he submits to God. Then what do we see also in 10? Did you find that word in Hebrews? It's got to be in the first few verses, like 1 through 5 maybe. It's okay. Oh, it's okay. We won't wait too long. I think it might be in 11. Okay. Anyway, we'll get it later. It's not important. I'll put it on my chart and you can have it later. Okay. So what else do we see in him in verse 10? He's unworthy. You have shown to your servant, I am your servant, for my staff only. I crossed this Jordan, and I now have 2 companies. Oh, I might have this in the wrong place. Oh, yeah, no. It's there. It just doesn't use the word. But he says, you have shown to your servant, for with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have 2 companies. So what is he doing?
He's showing how God has prospered.
Yeah, and in essence, what is he saying to God? Thank you. Thank you. Is it an important quality in our relationship, if we're going to come into salvation, that we have a thankful heart toward God and the things that God does? Is it a fundamental quality in your life on a daily basis as you're walking with God, that along with all the complaints and all the I wants and all the please do this, Lord, that we stop 5 seconds to say thank you, God, for who you are, for what you've done, for what you will do, for the promises you've made?
Yes.
I mean, and I think as a parent, we can also really relate to this. How many of you have had very ungrateful children in the past or present, right? Fortunately, I think my kids are both quite thankful now. But there was a period of time, especially in those teen years, where they are so ungrateful and they think you are so stupid, and it's all this negative thing. But they are not thankful no matter what you do for them. And you no more than get them one thing settled, and you do it at great expense of either time or money, and then they turn right around and act like you never do anything for me, right? That is what I think we do to God on a regular basis as God's children. I don't think that we really intend to. But I think when you don't stop and take the time to be thankful for the abundance of blessings. I mean, I came only with my staff. You know, what is David talks about? I came from my mother's womb in nakedness, right? I think he goes on to say, and in nakedness I'll leave. But maybe that was Job. But in any event, you come into the world with literally nothing, but God gives you life and breath. I like where in Acts 27 where it says he's determined the exact time and place in history that you are born. He literally puts you into the very family that you are born into. He does so that you might seek him and find him, although he's not far from any one of us. And I love that. So here we see him being thankful. He has a thankful heart. Oops.
So is the two companies what was referred to in verse 2?
No. That's a good question. Where now he makes a mention of two companies again, but this time, what has he done back in verse 7? He divided his family into two companies. And now he's even telling you, I had nothing. Now I have enough that I'm even able to divide into two companies. Plus, he's also sent on ahead many of his flock and his possessions, his female servants and male servants and so forth. He sent them on to his brother as, like you said, to butter him up a little bit, right? All right. Now we move into verse 11. After the thankful heart, what do we see in 11? Yeah, now he's calling on God. He calls on God for what? On God for deliverance. And if you want to be delivered, would you actually say this is like salvation? Salvation, in this case, it's salvation from death. Physical death. But is there a correlation for us even in that idea? If God is the author of life, he's the protector of life, Jacob coming to this place where he's recognizing the sovereignty of God. So in this, he's calling on God for salvation and for his sovereign work. Sovereignty and salvation in his life. So he's recognizing, again, more qualities. In verse 12, what do we see him doing?
Reminding God.
God, you said. So what does this tell us about what Jacob thinks about what God says? He's believing him. Yeah, he believes God. Believes God.
Always good to pray God's
Word or promises, right?
Can't go wrong with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you, though, I did not find even one pastor preaching on this. I'm so surprised. They kind of read over it. They almost, what they did is a lot of them concentrated on the fact that he is someone else's God, not Jacob's God yet.
Yeah.
Then they just
I know
kept.
Haley found this part. She's like, I didn't come up with that. And she came back and said, this is salvation.
Oh, I know. I
From
told
your-
her that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she gets a
And she's like-
preemptive
she's
class.
like, I didn't
Yes,
think
she
that's
did. She told me that when we were. Kaylee is Kristen's daughter, and I've been discipling her, or what do you want to call it,
good. Because
mentoring.
I'm the stupid person.
No, of course, because she's
Yeah.
the mom, and you're not going to listen to your mom, and Kaylee's a teenager,
Yeah.
Anyway, so she gets preemptive class teachings before we show up to class, which is like helpful for a young girl who's trying to learn the method and still is not catching on. And sometimes if you give them a little taste of what they're actually looking at and reading so that they understand it before they start tearing it apart, they're more interested in tearing it apart, right? They're going to be more interested in doing those word studies. So, all right. So he's believed God, basically. You have to believe God, believe that God is, and that he's a rewarder of those that seek him. And in this case, he's saying to Jacob, Jacob, you're going to go, I'm going to bring you back safely. And then Jacob has told God before he went, if you bring me back safely, what? You will be my God. Here we are. Thank you, 11:6. Oh, good. I was beginning to wonder about my thinking. Do I have Alzheimer's or something? Oh, thank goodness not yet. Okay, so Hebrews 11:6, that God is, am I reading it correctly or saying it?
And without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him.
Is that not what we're seeing Abraham or Jacob do right here?
Yes.
That is exactly what we're seeing Jacob do right here. He is recounting what God has done. He's confessing his need of God. He's believing that God's words and promises are true. He's submitting to God now as his servant. I mean, this is, if you could get any person to pray this prayer, in their own words, with their own circumstances, you have just led a person into a prayer of salvation. And this is him going to, what has pushed, though, Jacob to go to this place of prayer? His fear of what's going on in his circumstance. So when we consider in our lives the things that go bad and go wrong, right, and that bad health or financial stuff or bad marriages or, I mean, any of these things, how often do we go to God in this kind of desperational prayer when everything's great? We're happy. We're on our way to the beach for a party, for a picnic. No, we might go, oh, God, guide the car, thank you. Protect the car so we don't get, like, clobbered on the road. But that's, you know, it's so superficial on a day-to-day basis often for many of us. Unless God has gifted you with a ministry as a prayer warrior, for the most of us, we struggle with this. And I confess this. I mean, I feel so ashamed even when I go before the Lord. I pray daily. Actually, I pray a lot all day long. Mostly it's more conversational, though. It's like I just am acknowledging God is there, and I'm praying, and I am going, Lord, what are you doing? What is going on here? You know, I mean, I'm kind of questioning my life and the world that I'm living in. But this kind of prayer, this is awesome. And for us to skirt by it too quickly, that's why I'm taking the time out of our morning. I really want you to see this. Then last of all, so he's believing that God's word is true, right? That God will, in fact, do what he is going to do. Now, go back to verse 9. I'm going to take you back to verse 9 because I want you to see what precursored all this. He said, O God of my father Abraham and the God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you said to me, what? Return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. What did he do? What did Jacob do? God said, come back to the country. What did he do? He obeyed. Okay, so what do you see at this point in this journey? If you couple the fact that God spoke to him, he obeyed. We saw this with Abraham's journey too. Before God cut covenant with Abraham, what had he done? Called him out of the land of the Chaldeans. He obeyed God. And it was like, what was it, like 20 years or something, or 15 or so, I can't remember. It was a long time. Yeah, it was many years, 15, 20 years from the time he called him out until he cut covenant with him. And again, repeatedly, he was calling on God on occasion. He was also messing up a lot along the way, but he was obeying God. So a lot of times, I think what we see in the church are people who we're baffled or we're confused by them. They're like a dichotomy of insights when you're looking at their life, because on the one hand, they're showing up to church and they're putting money in the offering plate, we hope, right? Pastor hopes that most of all. They're doing baby steps towards God, but yet in the bigger pictures of their life, you're still seeing really overt sin, right? That's just not explainable if, in fact, they're actually walking with God. So I hope this kind of begins to help us to see journeys of people, and every step along the way is important. I know that when I was 9, I walked an aisle in a Baptist church and got baptized. Was I saved? No. But was it good that I walked that aisle and got baptized? Yes. Why? Because it's a part of the journey. It laid a foundational piece in my life. It showed, as I was being obedient to God, I was walking towards God. I was wanting God. It kind of is a hint that there's hope. You know, there are some people who, they are so cold, their hearts are so hard, and the Romans talks about how God will harden their heart eventually and turn them over to their own device. But God never gives up, even on them. There is hope until the day they take their last breath. And here what we see, though, with Jacob is he also had been inching his way toward God. He was obeying in part, and he was believing to a degree. He kind of made bargain with God back in chapter 28. If you'll bring me back, then you'll be my God. Now the rubber has met the road, and God has done what he had promised, and now Jacob is actually bowing his knee to God. So Jacob has obeyed God. That was back in verse 9. So that, I just think, is the coolest part of this whole chapter. It's probably not the most important piece to the the journey of all this, but I loved it. I thought we had to spend some time there. Okay, so now in 13 to 21.
What are you going to title a paragraph, though? Just Jacob's salvation?
I just put he prays.
Okay.
Jacob prays for God's protection. I mean, that on a superficial level is what most people probably read there. What did you all title that chapter, that paragraph? There you go. So, gee, was that obvious or what, right? But did you see that? I love that. I was like, thank you, Lord, for giving me that thought. And as I was listening to so many of these different sermons through the week, just tidbits here and there, and some of them I didn't even get to the end on, but I just kept thinking, they're not talking about that prayer very much. Why aren't they talking about that prayer? Okay. All right, so let's do 13 to 21. The next part is, what does Jacob do? Yep, he sends presents or gifts. Yep. To do what? Yeah, there you go. To appease Esau. Okay. It's really interesting, too. If you want to follow on this prayer with this next statement here, though, when you think, does anybody see any connection there about if you're talking about the journey of faith? I mean, I know part of it has to do with buttering him up. But at this point, he's prayed now. He's really submitted to God. We're really seeing him entering into salvation with the Lord. What do you see in the life of most Christians? Do you see, in relationship to what's being said here? In verse 11, what does he say? Oh, not 11. Sorry. I must have got the wrong verses on that. He's insisting on, why do I have these I have totally wrong. You know what I kept doing? I'll confess to you guys. I kept mixing up my two chapters because I was doing word studies in between, and then I would pick back up in the other chapter, and that I was messing myself up. Okay, why the gifts? This is a good question. Why the gifts? He is. Do you also know anything customarily as far as what the customs or traditions were of that day? When people would go away and return, or when they were celebrating anything, weddings, we've even seen this with dowries and so forth. So what do we know about gift giving and tradition? They are very important. Have we seen any of these situations where people are coming into the presence of one or going out, where if they go empty-handed, how do they feel about that? They're feeling what? Ashamed or sad? Or I mean, remember when Jacob showed up to Laban's, he had nothing, and he had to work in order to get the girls because he had nothing to give. He didn't have the daughters also didn't really have a dowry. Remember when they got married? What did Laban end up giving them? Handmaidens, each of them, because he really didn't have much of a dowry to give them. His wealth was little. So I just wanted you to understand, gift giving is absolutely customary. It's polite. It's an expression of love or friendship, just like it is today. But it was even more so then. I can remember back in the day, how many of you guys remember hostess gifts? Uh-huh. See, we're still all just about old enough to really remember that. You didn't show up to a party, and you didn't show up to stay the night at a friend's house without bringing a gift. I still do it to this day. And if I go and stay, I recently went and stayed with a girlfriend's sister. She put us up for a couple of nights. And I left a gift on the bed pillow when I left. Something to just say thank you for having me and for hostessing me and giving me a bed to sleep in when I needed it, right? So these are it's very generous, right? It's Esau, where does it say Esau saw on his face? That must be in the next chapter. I think I pulled in chapter 33. That's what I did. I'm going to skip this part of my notes. Okay, so in general, though, what do we see about the gifts here from 13 down to 21? Holy moly, he did some good breeding practices back there at Laban's, didn't he? All those, that paid off big time. So, behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us. And he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. So that's the motive in all of this. He gives him graciously and generously. 22.
The word I picked up on in 13 was selected.
Yes.
He didn't just say, okay, these ones go.
You know, I didn't look that word up. Did you look up that
No, I
word?
didn't.
I wish I had. I wonder if that's talking about the cream of the crop. He picked out the best of what he had to offer. You know, I know that I would do that. If I've gone to my garden and pulled up tomatoes and I want to share them with my neighbor, I'm going to give them the best tomatoes, right? I'm not going to keep the good ones for me. I'll give them the best ones. That's a generous way of doing things. Now, there are people who don't do it that way. They do the opposite. So this is really, I would like to see, somebody should look that up. Can I assign you that? Will you look that word up for us when you get home? Yeah. Okay, now 22 to 32, we'll finish this up. Okay, why are you arguing? I don't know. Okay, this part's really, really good. This is the part where everybody probably got really stuck, right? And I kind of got through it quickly because I guess I've seen it a lot. But what is going on here, and how did you title this paragraph?
Jacob wrestles for blessing.
Very good. Jacob wrestles for blessing. That's perfect. Let's put that up here. Jacob wrestles. I'm going to put on there God for blessing. Now, tell me what you think about this situation. Okay, a man. It just says a man, but it is upper. Well, in some translations, it's uppercase, and mine it isn't. On our observation worksheet, it isn't. Who is this man, and how do you know that? There you go. Context rules for your interpretation. So if you're not sure, why do you think he calls him a man? Instead of saying God wrestled with him, why does it say a man? There you go. That's important to catch. That what happened here then, we have another theophany, we have an appearance, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ taking on human form. So he's come in human flesh. He's wrestling with him. Okay, does this seem like if God wanted to, what would be the result of this? And how long would it take God?
No time at all.
Yeah, no time at all.
You didn't have to do anything.
At the end of the wrestling, at the end of the night, what does God do? To put an end to it. He literally touches him with his finger. So what does that tell you about the process of the wrestling?
More about
Jacob's
Jacob
been
and not
wrestling,
about
not God.
So what is God's strategy in this?
letting him wrestle.
He's letting him wrestle. Okay, so now let's come into some application again question. In our lives, are there times when God could give you your answer immediately, but for whatever reason, that burden or that trial remains for a period of time? And at the end of that, go ahead, ask your question, Carol.
I'm looking at 25 because when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, okay, the he and the him.
The he and him is God, or Jesus.
And there's no capitals on it.
Right, I know
So
that.
it's like,
He is the man, and the reason they're using lowercase there is because he's in human flesh, and it's just showing you that he's allowing the scenario to be that Jacob is fighting with a man of equal strength with him, so that there would be this long enduring process of wrestling. God wants him to wrestle. God wants him to struggle. God wants him to persevere, to want that blessing and to fight for it. There was a verse that came to me. Somebody look up 2 Timothy.
When I read it, I look at it as when a dad wrestles with his kid.
Yeah.
When you're a kid
And you
and
let
you're
him win.
sleeping off the couch and you're doing, he's going, and then eventually if it's time to end it, the dad will end it because you're a little kid and you have no strength against that. That's how I kind of pictured it.
That is a
Jesus is
perfect
like, go ahead,
picture.
let's do it. I'm going to
Good.
pull my strength back to match you.
And that's why he's using.
Feel good.
Okay, and that's what I wanted you to see. That's why he says a man wrestled, and then the he, lowercase h, the he, the lowercase, both of those. So if you're marking your observation worksheets, the word man should have a cross on it. That's a pre-incarnate of Christ. Then in 25, the first two he's are also Jesus. Put a cross on them. That's Jesus saw that Jesus himself had not prevailed, meaning he put himself on equal standing with Jacob so that Jacob could struggle with him. It was a designed, intended struggle on God's ground. I mean, God is the one in control of all this. He could, in a nanosecond, wipe Jacob out. He could destroy him with a thought or a word. But he wants Jacob to struggle. Why? Why do you think God wants you and I to struggle for his blessing? It makes you stronger. What else? I mean, we think about there is actually another verse besides this one. So, did somebody hear me say, look up 2 Timothy 4, 7, and 8? I want you to read that one for us in a sec.
It makes you stronger and it strengthens your conviction.
There you go. When it it's a blank. I think it's Peter, where it talks about why we have suffering. Yeah, it's temporary, and what it does is, and then it gives you this laundry list of things that it does in building your character through struggling and through
Perseverance and endurance.
endurance, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and I can never remember all those things. But yeah, so what does 2 Timothy say?
I fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. In the future there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who loved his appearing.
Okay, so fighting the good fight, keeping the faith, and there's a reward laid up for me. This is what God is doing here. He's saying, Jacob, you prayed this lovely prayer. You're right at the door. Now I want you to struggle for it. You fought your brother. You lied to your dad. You've done all these deceiving things through the years. You failed to call on me, by the way, often enough. Excuse me, right? Call on me. Now you're at this place of humbling yourself before me. You have now said to me, I am your servant. So show me this. And he lets him struggle with him. And in a way, it's a test. Do you really love me? If you love me, you will persevere in this.
But the thing that for me too is, yes, I see him struggling, wrestling, but when the angel or the man saw that he had not prevailed against him, that makes him sound like
Again,
a weaker one.
yeah, it does. This is, yeah, and again, remember, God has purposely made himself to be an equal to Jacob so that there would be this long enduring struggle. So God is of his design purpose and his free will subjugated himself. It's kind of like where it says, and Jesus took the form of man, right? He humbled himself. I think it's in Philippians 2, right? It says he took on the form of man, humbling himself and allowing himself to go to a cross. Could he have called the angels down upon the heads of all those men in that moment at the cross and not died and not been crucified and not been whipped and not been spat upon and his beard ripped from his face? He could have stopped it in a second, but he allowed it. That's what we're seeing here. God is allowing Abraham or Jacob to wrestle with him because God is bringing him to higher ground, bringing him in to this place of salvation that God wants him to be in.
Well, I think too with the prevailing, Jacob didn't give up because God could have won if Jacob's like, all right, I can't beat you, I'm done. That would
Right.
be prevailing. But he didn't. He just all the way
No.
from morning for
Even
hours.
after his hip was dislocated.
Yep, he's still hanging on.
He kept fighting.
That's it. In verse 27, now it says, and he, capital H in that instance because it's at the beginning of a sentence, but he, Jesus, said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and have prevailed. But then he goes on and he calls this place Peniel. And what does that mean?
Face of God.
The face of God. So he's seen the face of God, he's prevailed. And he says, you have striven with God and you have prevailed. Let's see, there was another place I saw that was second. Let me look on my notes. Let's see if I can do this. Yes, he changes his name. When you did your word study on the name Israel, what does it mean? Did anybody do a word
Not
study?
God. El is always God.
Well, yes, but what is Israel?
He who strives with God.
The name of Israel means God prevails. So, in essence, although he's saying to Jacob, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed, in what manner has he prevailed? He has prevailed because he's allowed God to prevail in his life. So that's why he turns around and he says, it isn't that you are in arrogance saying, I prevailed. He's saying, you prevailed because you sought me and I blessed you. What you really got in what you prevailed over, it's that word, the overcomer. It's what remember when we did Revelation, what are the promises to all the overcomers? And they get this, and they get this, and they get this. That's what God is really saying to Jacob. You have prevailed. You've become an overcomer. You have prevailed because you've allowed God to prevail. And so this is his salvation. This whole chapter is about the salvation of Jacob. So what I did on my observation worksheet is what you said earlier. I was talking to Kaylee about it too and saying how I mark my things. I just took a red marker or pencil and very lightly colored in with a block in these places where we see the salvation of Jacob occurring, so that later, I know, I drew my wrestling guys. See my wrestling? My guys are wrestling. I love clip art. I just have to lay it up on the computer and draw it, but I love things like this. It really helps me later to find, if I'm quickly looking for stuff, I can find them. Listen, I got Jacob bowing on this one. See him bowing? Over here. It's a little one, yeah. I've got camels. I do it all. Jacob praying. I got him praying. Oh, here's my camel. Okay. In any event, I marked them with a red box around them and lightly colored them. And I went back into every chapter where I see the salvation of these men, like Genesis 15:6. He believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. And all of my chapters are marked with just a light colored pencil in red where I see their salvation moment. So I've got one for Abraham, one for Isaac, and one for Jacob. And so that is going to be helpful to me when I'm looking for those later. You know, it just gives, and it also sets it off so that you understand that's the significance of this chapter.
When they comment here, I
Mhm.
often hear people say you cannot see God or you will die.
That's exactly right.
I think it would be a very interesting study to study what Scripture says about that, because here Jacob is saying, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved.
So what is he understanding? Yeah.
And back in 16:13, Hagar says,
Yes.
you are God
Yeah.
who sees. Have I even remained alive here after
I love it. I just listened to that music thing about Hagar in the wilderness singing that really beautiful. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's so beautiful. Remind me. We'll attach it so people can watch it. But she talks about each of these storylines about seeing God and having the hand of God being there and seeing God face to face. And God being with them in those moments of the empty womb and the broken hearts and the fear and the hiding in the wilderness and all these different stories. It's a fantastic one. Seeing God face to face in the Old Testament, the only way they could do that would be through a theophany. It has to be that God took on human flesh for them to see him. The way you know it's not an angel, so I would never put that storyline that Jacob's talking to an angel there, that he's wrestling with an angel. An angel would never say of himself, I'm going to rename you. They don't have that authority. And they would never say, at the end of it, I have seen God face to face and yet my light prevailed. Jacob tells us right there in verse 30, he understood that man was God. So it was God in flesh. Jesus says in the New Testament, when they kept saying, show us God, he says, do you not understand you have seen God? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? I think that's in the end of John somewhere, 14, 15, something like that. Okay.
Says that Hagar saw an angel of the Lord.
Right.
Speaking in the first
Person,
I, but it must have been some theophany.
it was a theophany, yes. And because what he says to her, he talks about, this is what's in your womb. I mean, he gives predictive information that only God knows. And he says, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to do this for you or that for you. And and then he gives her a command, go back. I mean, so this is the Lord speaking to
And
her.
I think when you see the angels, when they're really angels and there's a message, it says,
The Lord, thus
declares,
saith the Lord.
says.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he
Yeah.
quotes God
Yeah.
to people.
And they always say, don't be afraid. These angels, these angels of the Lord, don't usually
Or
start.
if people bow down to them, that's another good sign that it's not angels.
Yeah.
Okay, in order to expedite things, I'm going to go through Genesis 33 very quickly. I will answer any questions that you have. I have a whole list of word studies and things like that in here, but I don't think there's anything. Do you guys know of anything in there that's really making your head scratch in 33? If not, we want to just title things and get moving. We didn't title this one. Let's title this one for 32. Find my, oh, here it is. Yeah, I need a title for chapter 32. How do you want to title it?
Everything starts with Jacob and all of our titles here. So Jacob should be somewhere.
Yeah, Jacob, yes. Oops, I got to go back. Okay, Jacob, well, there's a couple of significant things. We see the part that we just talked about, Jacob is wrestling, right? So I would say if it were me and I'm titling, that would be one of the events that would catch my eye and I would remember what was going on there. The fact that he's wrestling with God, I know that's when God blesses him. It's when God changes his name. What do we know about name changing, by the way? It's a covenant practice. So when God renames him Israel, this is a sign that he's now in covenant with God. Okay? Because God does it, and it's a distinctive name. By the way, it's such a distinctive name, this becomes the name of their nation, not just the individual, right? Later, when he's praying, I think it's later, it says, the God of Israel this and the God of Israel that. Replace that word with Jacob. The God of Jacob this, the God of Jacob that. So now what we know about Jacob, he's in salvation. He has now entered into covenant with God. This is just so awesome. Okay, the title on this then would be like Jacob wrestles with God for blessing. And then you could put in that Jacob was given a new name, Israel also. It just depends on how much title you want, right? Or you could just know that that's the end of it. The end of it was he gets his new
So
name.
is this the official entering of the covenant then?
Uh-huh. because he has a new name, Israel. I just love that. Just that alone. As a matter of fact, when I marked verse 10, that word loving kindness, I mark it just in the same way I do the word covenant. Yeah, Jacob becomes Israel. That'll work too. Yeah, that's however you want to do that. Okay, so 33, let's do this one pretty quickly because I want to get through 34 if we can, because that one's a little tougher. 1 to 3, what do you see happening? How does Jacob meet? This is when the boys reunite, correct? So these are the twins. They're reuniting for the first time now at this point. How does Jacob greet his brother?
He divides his family now.
Mm-hmm. And
And he's
all the women and the
yeah, it almost seems like, but then,
ranks them by how much he loves them, I think.
sounds,
That Rachel and Joseph last.
it does. But what does it say in verse 3? But before that, what does it say?
Oh, he passed on ahead of
He
them.
passed on ahead of them. He did line them up in that order, you're correct, but then he went ahead of all of them. So he did take the lead. So if anybody was going to get killed in that encounter, it would have been him first. So does that change your mind a little? A little bit. Okay. Oops, I missed that part. The whole first half of that sentence, I just wrote it off. Okay. So in 33, so in this one, what I saw here is Jacob greets Esau bowing, right? And that tells us a lot. It shows his humility. It shows his repentativeness. It does a lot for us. Now, what about Esau in the next part, 4 and 5? Well, how does Esau greet? Yeah, he greets Jacob with kisses and tears. So if you wanted to, you could actually show these two as contrasting points, the distinctive contrast. So if you want to look for contrast, 1 through 3 is a contrast to 4 and 5, the way the two boys actually greet each other. So Jacob's fears were totally without merit at this point, but also what does this show you God has done? He has really softened Esau's heart. Now, the fact that the scripture shows us Jacob praying for all of this in this great distress and fear, and he's asking God to have sovereignty over this, to preserve his life, to save his life from his brother. And now the brother comes with open arms. It just shows answer to prayer. We don't know how long God had been working on his heart already. It could have been years and years that he had already been doing this. We don't know. Okay, 6 to 11. What does Jacob do? Introduces the family and does what? He gives gifts again to Esau. This is where I got my other verses mixed up. Right here. This needs to go over to this other paragraph over here. I put all this on the right. So we see in verse 11, please take my gift which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty. Now, what had Esau said previous to that? In verse 9. I have plenty. So there's another, I don't know if you'll call it a contrast, but it just shows what God has been doing in both the boys' lives. They both are blessed. They both have plenty. Neither of them needs anything. And yet Jacob insists that his brother receive this gift. I think he's making atonement. It's really an act of atonement in many ways. A retribution. You know, if you've wronged a person, especially in the Old Testament laws, you pay, and sometimes you pay double even. I see that, hints of that right here in this particular account. But he's very generous to his brother, and he wants his brother to know how sorry he is. I think that's awesome. So he gives gifts. Now in 12 to 17, What does he do? Where does he enter to? He's now entered into Canaan, right? Before he was about to enter, right? He prepares to re-enter. Now he has entered, okay? He enters Canaan. And at what place? Yep. And what does 𝐶𝐞𝐬𝐬 mean? Booths. Okay, why do you think he named it that? Well, apparently when he camped there was nothing. What does he do?
He makes food.
He builds booths for the animals, and what else? A house for himself, right? He's okay. So let's see. I'm in 33. Got to back up. Okay. There it is.
Bought the land.
Yeah.
Bought land, he's taking up residence.
Yep. Very interesting. Now, here's where we can get into a tiny bit of this speculation I was telling you about, where the story doesn't really tell us a whole lot of why does he do that? Why does he stop at this place, name it Succoth, build a house, build booths for his animals, has had this conversation with his brother, right? Esau said, let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you. But he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and the herds are nursing. Sounds like he's stalling a little bit, doesn't it? Did you get that impression? Okay, I did too. It's like he was so anxious to reconcile with his brother, and he showers him with gifts, and he's really repentive. But then when his brother says, come on, let's go to my place, he's like, hold on, buddy.
I'm going to ask a
What-
question because
okay.
I know you did and I did not.
Uh-oh.
Can you tell me where Seir is?
Yes.
Is it outside of
Yes.
Canaan?
Go to chapter 32, verse 3.
Is it outside of Canaan?
I got
Country of
on
Edom.
maps this week, and I found a really good map that has Seir on it.
Oh, good.
Did you guys look up what it means?
Yeah. What does it mean?
Harry.
It does, and it means
Named after
after who? Esau. So what does that tell you about Seir and the land of Edom? It's actually the land of Edom, which is a country. Esau, the land of Esau, which is outside of the land of Canaan. So now what do we know? He's dragging his heels. He's a little hesitant to follow him with all his possessions, with all his family, with everything he owns. Because what happened to him when he went to Laban? And what did Laban do? He kept holding him there, kept drawing him back, kept using him, kept wanting him. Now, Esau may not have had devious plot in it, but could you see a scenario where he might have done that, just followed him, brought everything with him? He gets, oh, brother, just stay. Just stay. Then you feel, oh, how many of you have ever felt that way? You go to visit someone, oh, just stay, just come join us, come do the, pretty soon you're wrapped into it, and there's no graceful way to get out of it. And he was supposed to go to Canaan, not to Edom. Okay. I love the fact.
This is where I need to
I know.
because
What-
God said here.
Yes, what I loved about this was the fact that God had already prepared it so that Esau had his own country. He had already apparently conquered that land on his own. He had 400 men who came with him in the beginning. Now you know he's a nation. Okay, so yeah, exactly. He had all the, so he's down here. So what I'm seeing in this, it seems like Jacob may have built a house and booths so that he could park basically most of his stuff, and even maybe some of his family and their slaves and their members, so that he would have a permanent place. He names it. He has a place. He has a house. He has booths for his animals. He has his own home.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't tell us he goes on to see his brother, but he quite likely could have. All it does is it goes from verse 6:17 to verse 18. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. He moves on to Shechem. What happened in between that? Well, there was a lot of time building a house, building booths, and settling there and naming the place. He basically established a little town, right? he did that, I think, so that he would not have to take all his stuff and go. I think when if he did go, it doesn't tell us, but I'm assuming he did not defraud his brother on this. He said, I'm going to come see you. I think he did. I mean, I hear people say, oh, he lied to his brother again, he's deceived. I'm going, are you kidding me? You think he's going to stab him in the back again after he just got reconciled? I don't think so. I think he established a place, a temporary place, that he never intended to stay there, but he did it so he could do it quickly and get down to visit his brother and say, oh, I've got to get back. The kids are there. The house is there. My stuff is there. I got to go home. It was great seeing you. Bye. He could gracefully exit that visit, but it doesn't tell us. So all we can do is assume. I'm going to give everybody the benefit of grace in this, and I'm going to say Jacob did not mess his brother over and lie to him again and rebuild another wedge between him. I think he went and saw him. But he established a home, and that's what Succoth is all about. And he named it booths, not house. Why? A booth is a temporary dwelling. It's a crude shelter, and it's temporary for the animals. And the Jewish nation, they have their that's right. The feast of booths, which is a temporary thing. I think he purposely named it that in his own mind and for his family's sake. This is a temporary thing. We're just going to be here temporarily.
Could have needed, just as he told Esau, could have needed to rest the animals because they
Absolutely. Absolutely.
big children.
So it all sounds so legit and so perfect. Yet he was dragging his heels right from the very beginnings. I think he immediately saw the danger of maybe getting sucked into another situation where he would feel obligated to stay with his brother, and he's not supposed to do that. And then there would be intermingling of the Edomites with the Israelites. Do you see? So this is my interpretation. This is totally Katie's commentary, but this is how I'm reading this. I'm looking at this. God has told him, I want you back in the land of Canaan. He's gotten as far as Canaan, but not quite into the interior of Canaan. He needs to cross that river yet, which he will do next. They don't give us any information in between, but he does stop long enough to build a house and booths.
And Jacob doesn't let Esau leave any of his people. Yeah.
Right. Yes, he doesn't want the intermingling. He does not. Yes, you are. Good catch. Yeah, no, don't leave your people. We're fine. Don't you worry about us. God's been with us this far. We can handle this, right? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord, he says. There's no need for that. And so Esau returned that day on his way, and Scripture clearly makes that a point for us to see. Yes. The Edomites did not stay and end up intermingling with the Israelites. The whole point to our storyline, chapter after chapter, marriage after marriage, has been the bloodline of blessing has been kept pure, and they don't intermingle with these foreign cultures. Okay, they don't do that until they get back on the land in the future, and then they mess everything up. Okay, so Esau returned that day. He journeyed on Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Succoth. Now, I think he named it that because he wanted it in his own mind and the mind of his family that it was a temporary place. And he did that temporary place because he just wanted an excuse to be able to leave his brother and come back to it and not bring all his family down there. Okay, so now we get to 18 to 20. I hope that makes sense to you. Otherwise, that whole storyline is a little disjointed and it doesn't really make sense. I think there's strategy going on here with Jacob. And I think he's learned a valuable lesson having dealt with Laban for all those years and how Laban kept basically twisting his arm and getting him to stay and do stuff longer than he probably intended. 18 to 20. Now what? Now it says now. What now? What? That's your. You need a clock on that now. So there's been some time that has lapsed between being in Succoth and where they're going to go next, right? So now where is he? And it uses some strategic words. Yeah. Now Jacob came how? Safely to the city of Shechem. Now what had been the conversation between him and God before he left? If you bring me back safely to my place. There it is. There's your cross reference. That's in back in chapter 28. So now Jacob came safely. Now what makes him go to Shechem, we don't know. It's a mystery still, and I haven't completely thought this one through enough to figure out why he ended up landing there. In my thought, nope. Well, he had been there probably, yes, but he had been through all of those places. He ended up at Bethel, and where's the other place? I think Bethel is where he started, right? And the place where the well was that. Go ahead.
Well, when I looked it up, it says the same as Shalem or Salem.
Yes.
Meaning peace and the seat of Melchizedek.
Shechem. Okay, good. So it's close to Jerusalem.
So
It could be.
essentially is
It could actually be right close to where he had made that pillar before, because that is what God told him to do. Go back to where you established that altar, and that we had this conversation where you had the dream, and he was supposed to return this. So this may very likely be very close to that. And I didn't have time to, although I drew a map, and it is near. It's above Jerusalem though, on mine, but it is close. Okay, so. On my map, there was Succoth on the other side of, this is the river. Can they see it okay on the picture? Okay, I can get in closer. Okay, so we got Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea and the Jordan River here. Succoth right here is where he came from Haram area down to Succoth and stayed there temporarily. Edom is way down here below the Dead Sea. He stopped at Succoth, then he crosses over to Shechem. Shechem is right here. Well, there's Bethel and then Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is down below that, but it's very close. I mean, and a lot of these names had not been firmly established yet, just so you know that. And remember, wasn't until Israel becomes a nation, and while they're still wandering in the desert, this is after 400 years in their captivity, which we're going to get to pretty soon here when we get into Jacob. But while they're wandering those 40 years under God's hand of judgment for not having faith in him, he kept telling them, you shall worship me in the place that I shall show you, right? We also know, having done our Abrahamic study, that Abraham took Isaac to Mount, I'm sorry, say it again? Yes, Mount Moriah. Thank you. My brain went blank. To Mount Moriah, and at that place he says, and in this place, this is called the Mount of the Lord, and in the Mount of the Lord it shall be provided, meaning the seed, right? And the salvation and the, okay, so we know all this is going to come together. It's culminating. It's just a process. So Shechem is not exactly Jerusalem, but it is close. And eventually, apparently, he moves on down to Bethel because he's going to have to run from these people here. Okay, so that's the storyline. We now got him safely back to Shechem, and you can go back to say, this idea here of being safely goes back again to Genesis 28, where God had promised that he would, or at least let me put it this way. Jacob asked God, if you will bring me back safely, then you will be my God. So this is what God has done. He has now brought him safely back. Are there any other questions on that? Okay, I only have 5 minutes to get through Dinah being defiled. Thank goodness we did not have 5 chapters to cover, which is what we would have had. These are too much. Okay. I'm going to give you a title on this one here real quick. Title. What do we have? How about just Jacob and Esau reunite, and then Jacob returns to Canaan safely. That's something along those lines. Or if you want to put one of the names like Shechem or Succoth in there, you could do that. I just kind of generalized it to Canaan. Okay? All right, now, this chapter, tell me on the whole, what have you seen happen in this particular chapter? It's a really horrible situation. Vengeance and wrath and revenge, right? It's all the big plot in this thing. What starts this revenge is what in 1 to 4? Okay, 1 4. First of all, Dinah's out running around the town by herself. That was really very foolish on her part. We don't know what her age was, but she's old enough to be pretty and desirable, right? And to be of marrying age. So there's this prince, she's defiled. So Dinah is defiled.
That word pretty made me think about how God chose really good genes to start his.
I know, isn't that so true? I know, they're all pretty. Yeah. So not only was she raped in verse 2, later it's going to tell us in verse 26 she's held in his house. I just think that's an important thing to see up front. Okay?
It sounds like the guy really loved her and wanted her.
Oh, that's what he says. Oh boy, he's laying it on thick after he raped her, and now he's holding her captive in the palace, in the harem.
If he really loved her, he would have done it the right way.
If he really loved her, exactly. And there's also this whole storyline is really, it's very telling if you actually use critique. As you go through this, you really have to critique motives and what they're actually doing, what they're actually saying. Don't just go for, oh, he loves her. Don't fall for that. How many men say that? Oh, he loved her. Well, then he got her pregnant out of wedlock, and now she's living with the consequences, right? That's what happens in our world today. Now, in this day, it was worse than that. She didn't have to get pregnant. She's been defiled. Okay, so defilement's way worse. And when you look up that word defiled, it really can have two kinds of, I'm going to put on here, defiled. And it's number 2930. It can be religiously or physically. Made impure or indecent, unclean. It's also ceremonially. It can also be in reference to profaning God's name, that kind of defilement.
Can you put this in up there real quick? So, of course, I've read this a zillion times. So this is the first time going slow and realizing, like, so why is this story in here? Oh, because we have to know how come Jesus comes from Judah and not from the other older sons.
Yes, it is. Yes. Who is God, who is man, and we're following the blood, and we're following that seed line. And what happens? How did not the firstborn of Leah receive the blessing like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did? But Jacob wasn't a firstborn either, right? He was. And so what did we? Right. What did we determine with Jacob was the reason Jacob got the blessing? Well, first of all, God's outside of time. He can look back into history, and what is God looking at? The heart. He's looking for the man whose heart will be fully his. So he's seeing in Esau a soft heart toward God, but with Esau, no. Jacob has got the soft heart, Esau didn't. And we see that through the character of Esau in the storyline. Sells his birthright, marries these crazy girls, then goes off and marries Ishmael's daughter. He just never gets connected, right? And then wants to murder his brother. That doesn't help either. And you know, murder, an eye is not an eye for an eye. If you stole a blessing, he's mad enough he wants to murder him, but that's not justice, right? It's kind of like in this storyline. Is it justice to murder an entire city of men because one man raped a girl? Is it even right to put to death a man who rapes? Do we even do that today? No. we might want to if we're the mom or dad. I can certainly feel that for them, but it's not justice, right? So we already know at this point in our conversation what these boys, what these two brothers did was not justice, okay? All right, so
All things work together for good, and God is starting to clean the land out.
yeah, yeah,
And Levi becomes the father of all of the priests.
I know.
That was
You know what? I was thinking about that in a way though, about my own personal walk with God. Remember last week I said to you, when I was in my journey into faith, I had said to God, I was in a very dark place. I'd lost a pregnancy, and I was really sad. And I was really, really mad at God because I recognized God is the author of life and death, right? I mean, He's the one that's in control of that. So I shook my finger at Him and said, I'm never speaking to you again. And what does He do? He makes me a teacher. So now what I do, I talk about Him day and night, never shut up. Okay, so He has a sense of humor. So I kind of think about that with the Levites. You know, here we have the Levites in this terrible defilement, but what do they end up being? The priesthood who keeps things pure. It's just like God to do that.
A tough task to be a priest.
Yeah, yeah. It is so funny. Some of these stories, you know, God has to have a sense of humor as you're watching a lot of these storylines.
And they never got to own land.
Yeah, 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 that's right. All right. Okay, so they heard about her defilement, that she had been defiled, and were very angry. Okay, so there's that one, and there's that one. Okay. Defiled, we talked about what that means. Now we're ready for 8 to 12, and I know I'm zipping here quick, but we're going to hit some of this. Now what happens in 8 to 12?
Shechem dad comes on the scene
Mhm.
and suggests, well, my son wants him, so let's just intermarry, and then it'll make everything all better.
Okay, so it's a marriage proposal, right? In the marriage proposal, he says to Jacob, thus you shall live with us. This is verse 10. He says, thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it. Now, listen, this actually is a sweet deal. If you know the history behind this, this is quite unusual for foreigners to get to be invited to come in and actually possess lands and have equal. It's like, remember in the New Testament talks about you're born a Roman or you're not. You don't get to just have the privileges of being a Roman unless you're born it. Well, it's the same thing here. You don't get the privileges of just moving on the land and owning stuff. Unless you are brought into covenant with that nation, and that's what this king is offering him. Why do you think, you have any idea what you think this guy's motives are? Go ahead.
In verse 23, it says, will not their livestock
Thank you. Exactly. So when I titled this, I went on to say it's a marriage proposal. Now I might have ulterior motive. Now I'm not sure if I'm spelling this right. Is that close?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, good. Okay. I used spell check, but I wasn't sure I even believed him when I saw it. I'm like, are you sure? There's not an A on that? Okay. Okay, so it's a marriage proposal with ulterior motives. And what you're going to contrast then is, let me look at the two verses again. Verse 10 with verse 23. Yeah. So you compare verse 10 to verse 23. This is what he tells Abraham, or Jacob rather, and what he tells his people.
But he's not even talking to Jacob, he's talking to the two boys.
See, that's
Whichever. Oh, okay. Now that's another point to know. Did any of you do some research on the tradition of why it fell to the boys rather than to the dad?
No.
Okay, remember the dad has got several wives, right? And each wife will establish her own unit, so to speak. They have their own headship. And in that, each of those boys, firstborns in particular, will take the lead as the patriarch of their group, so to speak. And I know that sounds weird. It should be Jacob and everything belongs to him, but it's really not that way. It will in the bloodline, which is what we're following, and the nation of Israel, they're part of it. But remember, later they become 12 independent nations, right? Or independent sub-states. I don't know what you want to call that. But there's 12 tribes. And each tribe will have its own patriarchal leadership. Okay, so in this case,
Wouldn't that be Reuben then?
well, it would, but Jacob is not on the scene. It just talks about these two boys. Okay, well, Reuben is her older one, right? Right,
Well, he
but
does talk to Jacob, though. He says that the Hamor goes out to speak with Jacob, then the boys hear this is going on, they come in from the
right.
field.
And the two that rise up to the occasion are these two brothers who want to protect her, but they are her brothers by that same mom.
Reuben gets knocked out of the later, so we're knocking out 2 and 3 right now. Reuben gets his, like, birthright removed later.
Right. But what you're seeing here is whose responsibility is it? It's not the dad's responsibility. It's actually the brothers. These brothers these are all from the same mom. Okay? These are Leah's kids. So these are her brothers through Leah. So her brothers are the one that is there. This is why Jacob, when he hears it, he just kind of goes, he'll keep his peace until the boys show up. And that is what I understand about the custom. That's what I read, and I can only say I believe them, because otherwise the story does not make sense. You're looking at this going, Jacob, what's wrong with you, right? Yeah, but no, it's because it's their responsibility. And also, you got to remember, by this point, Jacob is elderly. He now has a limp. He can't move around real well. It's not like he can go whip tails, right? He's going to wait for the younger kids to come in and handle this. So that's what's going on there. All right, now we've got 13 to 17. We have Simeon and Levi, right? And what are they doing? Yeah, they are deceiving. And how? Yes. Now, does anybody think that this is a problem? Well, first of all, it puts them to an unfair disadvantage, but besides that.
Doesn't circumcision then put them in covenant with God?
Yes.
So
Thank
then,
you.
like, killing
Thank you. So if everybody in our classes here, as long as everybody here understands this, apparently they have forgotten this. But the Abrahamic covenant came with circumcision as a sign of that covenant. That means they are taking a high holy article, an act that is associated with coming into faith through the Abrahamic covenant, and they are using circumcision against an enemy for under false pretense, through deceit. So they're taking a high holy article and using it for profane purposes. Boy, is this a mess. This is beyond shameless. This is disgusting. This is one of those things where God calls it, he abhors it. Later in Ezekiel, you're going to love this when we get to Ezekiel 36, he goes on and he says, you have profaned my holy name before the nations. And I'm going to vindicate my holy name because of what you have done. This is what do you think is happening now before the eyes of this nation? What does Jacob say later on verse 30? Yeah. And what does he call it? Odious. You've made me odious. This is what they have done to God too, because this is Jacob's God. They have made him odious before the eyes of the nations and the peoples around them. So this is where I came up with my title for this. I went, oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, Dinah is defiled, right? And she's defiled by force. Oh, that's not writing. Can't see a thing there. Dinah is defiled by force, right? That meaning rape. But what have these guys just done? Yeah, they have defiled. Simeon and Levi are defiled. I almost can't reach. I got to crawl over here. Are defiled. How? Yeah, or by their own what? What are they doing here? They're going for revenge. They're not even looking for justice here. They're looking for revenge. They're really angry. Should we put up with this, Father, from these men? Should we? That's their answer when Dad confronts them. Do you see what you've just done? You've made us odious in the eyes of the people. We're going to have to leave now. We're running again for our lives. Now in fear of what are they going to do? Where's the retribution going to come from? We're odious to them. But they said, oh, but should he have treated our sister as a harlot? They do not get it at all. They have no idea what they have just done to the holy name of Israel, Israel's God. It's amazing. Okay, Simeon and Levi deceived using circumcision. This is unbelievable. And then in 18 to 24, and we're done. How bad did I get? About 15 over, not bad. Now, the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬, those people from that city, right? That's a big word. The 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬. Concerning them, were they totally above board and honest in all of this? No, they had dishonesty and greed in mind as well. That's where you go back to that verse 23 and also to verse 21. These men are friendly with us, therefore let us live, let them live in the land and trade. For behold, the land is large enough for them. That's not going to be any skin off our nose. Let us take their daughters into marriage and let them give our daughters to them. Only in this condition, he talks about the conditions, but hey, will their livestock not be ours? Will their property not be ours? Will their animals not be ours? So let's go ahead and consent to this. So the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬s were not being above board and good in any of this either. Do not think that they have been poorly treated. It sounds like it on the surface, but when you look at their behavior, they were also working under deception. They do not, and the fact that the son, the prince, raped the daughter. She's a young girl. She's out there alone. A gentleman would have escorted her home and said, you do not want to be out on these streets alone. This is not a safe city to be wandering around in, young lady. And I really like you, and I think you're hot, so let's just date. I mean, he could have done that, right? But no. Or let me talk to your dad about us getting a marriage going here or something. Had it all been, but in a way, think about it. If it had been done correctly, should Jacob have allowed that? No. Why? Do not intermarry. We've learned a lot, you guys. You guys are really catching on. Isn't it interesting how you're reading these texts now differently? Yes. You've got a different color glasses on that we're reading everything through the blood of Jesus, through the bloodline that God is establishing, through the seed line that God is wanting to develop, through the righteousness that he wants his people to walk through and work under. And what we really see is the world is devious, and you've got to be on your toes at all times. You cannot just be sucked in by, oh, he loves her. Yeah, no. All right. Thank you.
What is it? 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬 also, and you have 25 to 31 to give.
Do I have another paragraph? 25 to 29?
You just say
Oh, to 31. Oh, yeah. Okay, 30 to 31. So where am I at? 24.
24, it says the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬s also something.
The 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐬𝐬𝐬s also, have dishonesty or are dishonest. Darn it. I thought it was done. I was doing so good. Okay. And I didn't give you all my notes. I was really zipping through that, I know. But 25 to 29 is Simeon and Levi, they killed and plundered as vengeance for Dinah's defilement. Okay, they.
You kind of have to wonder if Simeon and Levi rubbed something in when they were doing the circumcision. Oh, really? Rub a little.
Oh, it's terrible.
You make them all sick.
I'm just going to put it this way on here. I didn't do it on my paper this way, but Simeon and Levi's vengeance, this anger that they had, this over the top, unbridled anger. There's righteous anger, and certainly they should have had that. But Simeon and Levi's vengeance led them to murder. And there's a distinct, that's not justice, that's injustice. So there was that. And then 30 and 31 is Simeon and Levi have done a disgraceful thing to Israel and defiled themselves. So I titled it this way. Dinah is defiled by force, but Simeon and Levi are defiled by their own revenge. So again, what was the definition? There's physical defilement, but then there's what? Religious defilement. So here we see the two contrasts going on. I thought that was very interesting when I picked up on that. I went, oh, that's really good. I hadn't seen that before. That's why you want to do these things inductively. Thank you. Finally, now we're done. We'll see you all next week.